This is just a quick off-the-cuff hangout. Doing it old school, not using OBS or anything today. I just felt like doing this real quick. I was just thinking about how arguments get derailed and topics get derailed. And we often talk about the scientific method and how it has strict rules about um, what it is, what it isn't, what must be done procedurally. And the same is true of logic or reasoning. Logic is just orderly thinking according to established rules that work consistently. And this is not attempting to be a science, so we can't call it a pseudoscience, but we can say that without coherent reasoning, according to established principles that are applied consistently, you can't do the scientific method. You can't do anything very well if you don't have a way of determining whether someone is using sound reasoning. And I wanted to just put up a couple of quotes real quick that I collected on my website, and just to give some background on why it is that there's such a thing as the logical method is just, I'm just terming it after the scientific method, and how and why arguments get derailed. Now, tomorrow in the Thursday weekly lesson, we're going to go over infiltration as it applies to the Christian community. But this is kind of a forerunner to that, which is why I wanted to do that today real quick. And you can see here, there are a couple of quotes from Judge Clarence Thomas back in 2001. And here I am talking, and this thing hasn't even started yet. Nope, I'm looking at the wrong page. Okay. Sorry about that. This thing can be very confusing at times. And I'm still not sure if I'm broadcasting. I think I'm broadcasting somewhere. I just don't know where yet. Anyway, this is very confusing way YouTube is doing this. I don't even know where this is live broadcasting right now. If there's anybody there, I'm sorry, I don't see you yet. I think I finally got it. There you are. This was very confusing. Hey, AJM, Intense Man, and Teddy. So sorry about that. Anyway, back to these quotes. A good argument diluted to avoid criticism, not nearly as good as the undiluted argument. We best arrive at truth through a process of honest, vigorous debate. Arguments should not sneak around in disguise as if dissent were somehow sinister. One should not be cowed by criticism. And just going to stop there to say, people will tell me every time I disagree with someone that I have a problem with their opinion as far as allowing them to accept it, which is the opposite of the truth. The person who doesn't want to be disagreed with but wants to freely express their ideas is the one intolerant. And what they're saying here in this first paragraph is that disagreement is fine. Everybody, even, Christians especially, should be fine with disagreement. The problem comes when someone says, because you disagree with me, there's something wrong with you. And we get that all the time as Christians, hey, Clary. So argument, also, a lot of Christians will say, well, you should never argue. You must not quarrel. They'll quote the verse. But what they're talking about in that context is people who go around looking for fights. And that's not what Christians should do. But we are to defend ourselves, and especially to defend the faith, and that otherwise the New Testament would not have been written, and especially the letters. But argument by itself is not bad. We even have a passage in Acts where the first martyr, Stephen, before he was martyred, obviously, was engaging in rigorous public debate with the Jewish leaders, the rabbis and scribes. So argument in and of itself is not wrong. It's the motive of their argument, and whether it's done by sound reasoning, rightly dividing, if you will, is the difference. And then the second paragraph here, in my humble opinion, those who come to engage in debates of consequence and who challenge accepted wisdom should be expected to be treated badly. We are very familiar with that. Nonetheless, he goes on, they must stand undaunted. That is required, and that should be expected, for it is bravery that is required to secure freedom. So it is, in my opinion, cowardly for us as Christians not to stand up for our faith, and yet we should expect this kind of a treatment. Um, but here's another good one from 2009. Eric Rush says, when another's principles are based upon fallacy and devoid of reason, when logic is convoluted and infinitely mutable, and all rhetorical and perceptual roads lead to a foregone preferential conclusion, it is folly to engage that individual. In such cases, the flawed pretext of granting our errant fellows their fair and even handed due is recklessness. I think that's an excellent quote. So, what they're saying there, if it wasn't clear the first time, is that if a person you're talking to is not even using sound reasoning, they're using numerous logical fallacies, which are identifiable and cataloged. That's what logic is all about. And we ourselves need to be careful we're not doing these things, because the advice here, which I think is sound, is that there's a time when it isn't wise to listen to somebody, not because you're afraid they might disagree with you, but because their idea is devoid of logic. And that's not something you decide just on ideology. That's something you decide on the basis of the rules of logic, this logical method. So if we see that someone is operating from complete nonsense, it's reckless, he says here, to give them their free speech, so to speak. And this, again, is not a Christian, non-Christian issue. This is a logic, non-logic issue. This Eric Rush, I don't know anything about this person, but it's a good quote. And they're saying that when we engage in argument, we shouldn't bother if the other person is totally making shipwreck of logic itself. We've run into this in other channels. There's people, it's kind of a Zen idea of deliberate anti-logic, where they claim, for example, the classic statement is nothing is knowable. Okay. That itself is a claim to know that nothing is knowable. Therefore, it's self-contradictory. That's an absurdity. And you don't argue with people like that, not because you're afraid they might be convincing, but because they don't use logic. They are against logic expressly. So to give those people the time of and attention is to, the blind leading the blind. So when people throw away logic, when they throw away all objectivity, while also unavoidably contradicting their own claim to not believe in objectivity, you don't talk to people like that. I don't care if it's atheists, the what one ex-atheist called the rabid drooling atheist, or people claiming to be Christians, um, such as on the Bible versions debate or whatever it is, where logic is really thrown out the window. It's foolhardy and reckless to engage those people in conversation. So, and then here we have the famous quote by Arthur Schopenhauer that truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed, then opposed, then accepted as self-evident. I'm not saying that if we engage or not engage with fools in their arguments, that things will work out necessarily, because some people go to their graves believing absolute nonsense. And yes, good point in the chat that Acts 17 is a great chapter for a number of reasons. One of those being, as stated there in the chat, that Paul did debate the philosophers, the Greek philosophers. And the point there, also, the main point I would get as Christians out of that is that his approach to evangelism was much different than Peter's approach to the Jews, who knew the one true God, but had rejected the Messiah. And they had to repent of that and be baptized. That was their thing as Jews to do. And what Paul told the Epicuric and Greek philosophers, the Stoics, and all those people, is that God has given a pass for the ignorance of the nations in the past. But now that Jesus has come, which he proved to be the Messiah by God raising him from the dead, there's no more excuses. And so this is an important principle, that we don't, first of all, our evangelism is not spreading fire insurance. of selling fire insurance, and second of all, that you can't, throw away all evidence either. Paul appealed to eyewitness testimony. Hey, concerned citizen, good to see you. He appealed to eyewitness testimony, which, as I've tried to say many times before, is one of the unique things about our faith. It's an evidence-based faith. I believe because I know. And those who say they don't believe that to be true, so that's self-contradictory. So I freely admit to believing, but this is not a bad thing since it's unavoidable as humans. We are not all-knowing, and so we can only say what our personal convictions are. I know what mine are, and I know you guys know what yours are, but there are people who claim to have none, yet they're perfectly fine with bashing you or ramming their claimed disbeliefs down your throat, which proves that they don't really practice what they preach. So there's more stuff here. And you know what? I should give you the link for that. I should combine it with my handy sayings page, but I just, don't work with that my old website that much. It's mostly I call it a library now because that's what it is. I just keep stuff there. I rarely change it. But the point is that when we keep increasingly recently running into people who claim that they don't believe they know, which is a lie, it's delusion. Everybody believes they know. They're convinced they have personal convictions, and we're allowed to have those too. But in the end, it's simply a belief. It's based upon, if it's based upon anything, if it's not based upon anything, it's even more ridiculous. But if it's based upon anything, it's that, first of all, you claim to have an ability to know true from false. And those who claim there is no such thing, that no one is allowed to find truth, which is why I called the series on Thursdays Truth Finders. Those people who claim there's no such thing as finding truth, that it's arrogant to do so, are again self-contradicting because they claim to know a truth. When they say it's wrong to know truth, they're claiming that as a truth. So the point being of this short little hangout is just that when you run into people who are saying you don't have the right to do this or that, or that your beliefs are hogwash, but no one should have them and they have them themselves, you're dealing with a fool. You're dealing with someone who throws away logic, and those people aren't worth your time. So this is why I don't bother with some people and I block some people, because there is no point in talking to people who aren't listening, for one, and for two, are only there to amuse themselves, because it sure isn't logic and reasoning and discussion that they're after. Those are the farthest things from their minds. They're there to lecture you and beat you over the head with their opinions, which they mistake for objective facts, which they don't believe in. It's so self-contradictory, it's laughable. Anyway, I just wanted to make that backdrop to tomorrow's lesson lesson, hangout, whatever, discussion, on 1 Eastern tomorrow afternoon, because we have to base everything on the logical method. It underlies the scientific method. It says that there are things that can be discovered. You can't have the scientific method without the logical method. And so when people throw logic to the wind and decide to just name call and bash and flame and slander, um, when those people are around, I just will not talk to them. I don't care if they're atheists or King James onlyists or whatever it is. If they're not going to use logic and reason and apply it consistently, they're not the kind of person that's going to build anyone up. And that's what our conversation, especially as Christians, should be about. So those are good quotes in my opinion. That's why I put them on my website, and it is my opinion. And there are also, let me go to my features page on Bible Basics, I think is what I called it, Bible Study Basics. And I'll get you that link as well. Because not only do we define our terms, what it means, for example, to take the literal method, that's my namesake there. I go into the basic rules of logic. So if you wanted a quick, handy reference, there it is. God is a God of order, 1 Corinthians 14:33. Come and reason, Isaiah 1:18. We have some links here and terminology, what a fallacy is, what a premise is, what a syllogism is, and then a short list of what the fallacies are. A lot of people, for example, think that ad hominem is always an attack, always a personal bashing or flaming. They'll say, I wasn't bashing or flaming you. Well, that's an ad hominem abusive. That's only one type of ad hominem on the opponent's character based on their just their character mainly. And yet there are also other ad hominems, and poisoning the well and ad hominem are both types of red herrings, and all these sorts of things you can look at. Then I also explain what the literal, historical, grammatical hermeneutic means. Hermeneutic is just a method of interpretation. So if you want quick, handy references to things like that, there they are. Also, how time is told in the New Testament, which solves a lot of alleged contradictions. And the Passover and other feasts, which clear up a lot of things about what day of the week Jesus was crucified and all that sort of thing. But the main thing is that we come to any discussion with certain rules of engagement, which should be, first of all, as Christians, to love and pray for people. That's why we engage them, but to also recognize when the person is only there to waste their time or amuse themselves, in which case you shake the dust from your feet and walk away. And by the way, that practice meant that the dirt from the place you were visiting was not worthy to be carried with you to where you were going, and that's why you shook it off the bottom of your shoes. It was an insult. And Jesus told his 70 disciples he sent out to insult people like that when they rejected the truth. And also in Revelation, or no, not Revelation, but regarding the end times, it says that God will send them a strong delusion who have hated the truth that would save them. So we have to keep all these principles balanced and not fall, as some Christians do, into an excuse to, quote, beat their fellow servants, unquote, by taking Jesus driving out the money changers as an excuse to just flame and bash and belittle other believers who simply disagree with them on some topics, such as Bible versions or eternal security or prophecy, whatever it is. So everything has to be balanced. Yes, that's a good Proverbs 26:4-5. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. And that's a good balancing passage too, because people will say, well, those contradict each other. So what they're saying is, like any Proverbs, there's a situation in which to apply it. And so when you're, as another old saying says, or not as old, but a common saying is that never argue with a fool. They'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. So that kind of goes along with the first verse there, the verse 4. But verse 5 is knowing when to stop. That's mainly what I've been talking about. The verse 5 is knowing when this person is only intending to drag you down to their level and not engage them in conversation. Yep, lots of good Proverbs. One of my favorites is 18:17, and I think verse 13 also in there, about I think it's 13 that says it's foolhardy to conclude a matter without hearing it first. And then verse 18 or 17 says, the first person to speak always seems right until they're cross-examined. So, and what I prefer to do when it comes to Christians, especially to cross-examine, I don't like to try to publicly embarrass them. So I'll go to my own channel and present my case, and then people can read it as they choose or not. So that's why I mostly avoid debate. I don't like to fight. I like to present. I like to talk to people who are rational and calm and who aren't bent on just destroying whoever they talk to. I've done my share of debates, so it's not about fear. It's about being tired of being in the trenches all the time. I did that for decades. online way before I got to YouTube. So, anyway, I just wanted to lay that foundation for how, in tomorrow's hangout, we as Christians can apply logic. It's not opposed to the Bible at all. God invented it to determining, having the discernment to know when someone is subverting the faith, because then we get into a lot of issues that depend on that, and I wouldn't want to jump the gun on that. So, um, yeah, the word doctrine, by the way, is just means teachings, official teachings, basically. And we as Christians have those. We have the teachings of the apostles. We have the teaching of Jesus, of course. Um, but a lot of bad connotation has been brought into that as something that is devoid of reason and completely closed-minded, which is what we get accused of when we walk away from people or don't listen to them. But um, the the doctrines with the bad connotation is, yes, what he absolutely came to get rid of. He was opposed to the traditions of the scribes and Pharisees, which were basically Talmudists. That's the Masoretes, the Masoretic text underlying most English translations was actually Talmudic. These were the people who made the Talmud. This is the same kind of mindset, and their purpose in making the Masoretic text was to obscure messianic prophecies, because the Christians were using the Septuagint to prove that Jesus was Messiah. And at first, they tried their own Greek translation. It didn't catch on. So then they decided, after a few hundred years, that they were going to make an authentic Hebrew version, which fools a lot of people into thinking it's actually faithful when it's not. They were faithful to copy their own writings, even calling what they did to the scripture. They faithfully recorded that and copied it. But the thing is that they changed it. They changed the times. If you compare not only Septuagint but three other ancient witnesses before the Masoretic text, they added, or yeah, they added, I think, something like 650 total years to the timeline to again obscure messianic prophecies so that Jesus wouldn't fulfill them. And that's why they believe that to this day. They believe their own lies. They etched them in stone. And so it's those Talmudists that Jesus had a problem with and who will be eradicated from Israel during the tribulation to come. So when people do all this Jew hate that I see in increasing measure, which is prophesied, um, what they're actually aiming at are the Talmudists, and God will use people like that to get rid of them and purge Israel. But there are true Israelites, and so it isn't fair to broad brush every Jew as having some genetic fault, as most people try to allege. So all that to say that the truth will set you free, as Jesus put it. And as Christians, we cannot rightly divide the word of truth until we know how to logic. And that was the main point I wanted to get at today. There are very few other hangouts to really feel comfortable in, not because they have different ideas, but because they're illogical and self-contradictory. And it's really frustrating to be bombarded with that every day. Hey, all people, good to see you. So I'm probably done for today. I want to help save the voice for tomorrow as well. I'm glad to have it back at all. It's between allergies and viruses. It's been mostly very raspy the last 2 weeks. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I hope it helps. Comment in the chat. Israel is a land. A land was granted to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promise to Abraham was from God and it cannot be revoked. He was promised land, and the boundaries are described in geographical terms such as the Mediterranean Sea, the Jordan River. Those were the west and east boundaries. There are north and south boundaries. I think the south boundary is something close to the Nile. I'm not sure. But Israel has a specific bordered land. And if you look at the Old Testament prophecies of the millennium, the rest of the nations will dwell outside of the land of Israel, and they will bring tribute to it once a year, or they will suffer plague and famine and all sorts of things. So anyway, for more about that, you might want to watch the series on covenants, But the promises to Abraham were very physical and literal and having to do with this life and the geographical boundaries of the land of Israel. So they are promised land. That's why it's called the promised land. And it is for Jews, and God isn't done with them yet. He will purge them. That's why they are there right now in unbelief. Hey, Truth Freeze. They're in the land in unbelief, and God will purge them. That's what the main purpose of the tribulation is. So there is, I understand there's covenant theology where they don't believe there's any distinction between the church and Israel now. I strongly disagree to that, but the reasons are in the videos I've done on the lesson videos. So we'll just have to disagree on that. The important thing is that we treat each other kindly as brothers and sisters in Christ and not beat our fellow servants, and to um, remember what the important thing is to show unity when we stand against assaults on the faith. That's the important thing, that Christians don't cut each other down. This is why I will not, once I know someone is a King James onlyist, I will not speak to them at all. I've tried to give more chances and more chances and more chances to people, and they can't let it go. They want to make non-King James readers the enemy. And so I just will not talk to them at all. So, other than that, we need to try to get along on the gospel and the basics of the faith and remember what we're here for. So, there will be a New Jerusalem. There will also, if you look at Ezekiel 40 and forward, two other cities, the earthly Jerusalem and some place called the Lord is there. They are three different places by description. They can't all be the same. So check out any material on, or just read Ezekiel after chapter 39, and it will describe the fact that for now the New Jerusalem is in heaven, and there will be a rebuilt city of Jerusalem here on earth, also a special holy city. The Lord is there, and then after the tribulation, we will have new heavens, new earth, and only the New Jerusalem, which comes down to the earth. Sorry about that. But we're getting way far off track here, which, again, I just wanted to lay the foundation of how important logic is to any study of the Bible and how we conduct ourselves in these chats, and to recognize when we're talking to someone who doesn't abide by logic at all or even try. I mean, we all make mistakes in logic, but there are people who absolutely live by it, by anti-logic, and those are the people that don't deserve the time of day. So anyway, that's all I have for now. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Thanks for coming, and we'll hopefully see you all tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern.